first place, thank you very much, Mr. Director, for giving me this chance and opportunity to speak about the Republic of Moldova, the challenges which we have faced on our path of building a modern European functioning and hopefully at some stage a boring country. Also, it's a chance to discuss about our European agenda and how this agenda serves and helps us to achieve this goal of building a modern, functioning country, and also to discuss what is the support which Moldova gets from its European partners, including, or in first place, maybe countries like Poland, in achieving these results and this objective. I understand that we don't have too much time, about 40 minutes. Therefore, I'll try to be very short in my introduction so that we have time then to ask questions, make comments, because it would be very helpful for me and for my colleagues. And I have here Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Integration, the Deputy Prime Minister, who is in charge of the reintegration of the country. As you see, we go hand in hand, reintegration and de-integration. And it's also because we do believe that the European integration will help us to address the issue of the reintegration. But very quickly about Moldova, where we are and what we'll be doing in the coming weeks and months in order to make sure that the process I referred to is on track and that we are successful in modernizing Moldova. As we mentioned, Mr. Director, very rightly, Moldova experienced at the beginning of this year a political crisis. If you look at the process Moldova went through since 2009, September 2009, when we had a change in power, when the Communist Party, unreformed Orthodox Communist Party, was ousted from power, and the pro-European, pro-democracy coalition came to power. Since 2009, we always faced challenges. We always faced crises. Just before we faced constitutional crisis, because of those constitutional crises, we had to have early elections in 2010. We had to go through a referendum. We had to go through a period of quite strong instability. And because of this constant instability, it was very difficult to focus on midterm objectives, to embark on very difficult, very painful, but very necessary reforms. This last crisis was more of a political nature because of the bigger disagreements within the former coalition. And of course, it marked very much the political process in the country. It affected the trust of the citizens of Moldova in the capacity of the politicians to focus on the issues which matter for them. It shattered the trust which we had in Brussels, but also in EU capitals, on the sustainability of our reforms. But what was more important is that at the end of this political crisis, we were able to find an European solution to it by reshaping the coalition, a coalition which is now being able to draw upon the lessons of the previous governments, which is now much more efficient in setting up the necessary stability, in setting up the very clear agenda, in addressing the issues, and in regaining slowly the trust of our citizens and, of course, of our European partners. So, having this coalition now back into power, having a relatively stable environment, having only 1 year and a bit ahead of our election, until the next elections, of course, we have many tasks ahead of us. First of all is to make sure that we get back the confidence of our citizens. You know that Moldova is still considered to be the poorest country in Europe. Our statistics say that Kosovo is the poorest country in Europe, but because Moldova doesn't recognize the independence of Kosovo, then we have a problem and we are doomed to be considered as the poorest country. at least according to the statistics, because if you visit Chisinau and some other towns, you will not get this impression that Moldova is the poorest country. But we have to focus on job creation, which means addressing the issue of the constraints in the business, which means making Moldova much safer and much more friendly to attracting direct investment, and including attracting investments from countries like Poland and other members of the European Union, but not limited just to the countries of the European Union. Of course, we need to focus on the phenomena which exists and affects the security of Moldova, which is called corruption. Corruption in the justice sector, corruption in the policy-making decision on economic issues, in other relevant spheres, on reforms of our law enforcement agencies, of the Prosecutor General's Office, which was called, probably rightly so, by the Council of Europe's rapporteur as the most Soviet institution in Moldova, to continue the reform of our police. So everything which I mentioned sounds easy, but probably you know how difficult it is, because in first place we have to address the mentality issues. We are all a bit homo sovieticus, and we are all considering that the country and the society has to respect the law, this rule of law, but just maybe with our own exception as individuals. So how to overcome quickly these problems of changing our mentalities, of making sure that everyone understands that supremacy of law means no exceptions. Either you are prime minister or you are a simple worker. Of course, we have to deal with the time pressure. As I mentioned, we have only 1 year and a bit ahead of us. In addition to these usual problems, so to say, economic, social, political institutions which still need to make sure that they become accountable for the citizens of Moldova, of course, we still have to deal with the same old wound which is called Transnistrian problem. Of course, we have to deal with an opposition which is not necessarily very constructive. The Communist Party of Moldova is now calling for a so-called Velvet Revolution, which is a contradiction in terms when a Communist Party wants to organize Velvet Revolution. My comments in the press was that usually one would associate the Communist Party with bloody revolutions, not velvet revolutions, but at least that's what they say they want to organize. Of course, we have to deal with some new problems, new tensions, which are very artificial. For instance, we hear now in the southern part of Moldova where we have the Gagauz minority, calls made by some politicians to organize a referendum on the independence from Moldova. Of course, we need to make sure that we are able to find common denominators on several delicate issues with our own church, on issues like, for instance, the so-called equality of chances or non-discrimination laws which we had to pass in the process of adjusting our legislation to the EU legislation. And our determination to pursue the European integration path is very strong. And we are determined to do so because we understand that European integration is not just a civilizational, if you want, choice. It's very much a choice which would help us, again, to modernize Moldova. If you look at countries like Poland, including Baltic countries, other Central European countries, even Romania or Bulgaria, you will see that the European, and in their cases, the Euro-Atlantic integration was the strongest motivation for the elites to reform, but also was the necessary pressure on them to reform. And that is exactly our message to our friends in Brussels, in Warsaw, in Bucharest, in Berlin. Help us, but also bring the necessary positive pressure. That's how we take your advices. That's how we take your suggestions. Our European agenda is concrete, or consists of concrete items, and has the short-term objectives, which is initialing in Vilnius the association agreement together with the so-called DCFTA. And of course, we hope very much that in November in Vilnius, the European Commission will make a statement that Moldova meets the benchmarks or the conditionalities on the visa liberalization plan, and will propose and will advise the member states of the EU to examine the possibility of raising the visa conditions for the citizens of Moldova within the mandate of this European Parliament and within the mandate of this European Commission, which means before the end of next year. These are the short-term perspectives. Mid-term perspectives, which to us means the end of next year, to sign the association agreement, to sign the free trade area, and to get the visa-free regime. But of course, these agreements are just important milestones in our final agenda. In our final agenda to make Moldova eligible for the EU enlargement process, so that Moldova would be able to apply for membership, get a positive result, become a candidate country, and begin the negotiations on its accession. This is key for Moldova. Again, there is no alternative for Moldova than European integration, and Moldova will pursue its goal. Does it mean that the process of pro-European integration is irreversible? Not yet. Unfortunately, I have to say not yet. We will have at the end of next year elections. Elections which will be very much about the same subjects as you have here in Poland: pensions, salaries, jobs, infrastructure. But it also will be an election about the future of Moldova, about its choice, whether it's European integration or whether it's Eurasian integration. Because, as you know, currently our communist opposition has chosen the integration into the Eurasian future union as their key foreign and domestic policy objectives. Speaking about the foreign policy, of course we believe that the European integration is these key fundamentals of our endeavors, of our actions, of our thinking, of everything which we undertake within Moldova, because it will help us to build a viable political system. It will help us to reform our justice and to make sure that the corruption is diminishing. It will make sure that our citizens will understand not just their responsibilities, but also their rights, and vice versa. But it doesn't mean that the European choice doesn't mean that Moldova wants to neglect our Eastern partners. The relations with the Russian Federation, for instance, are extremely important for us for many reasons. Be it trade, be it political dialogue, be it Transnistrian conflict, or the visit of the Russian Patriarch, which took place just yesterday and the day before yesterday, highlighted another important dimension of our life, which is the expression of the fact that Moldovan, or a part of Moldovan Orthodox Church, belongs to the Russian Orthodox Church. So these links are important, these realities have to be taken into account, and it means again that we will make sure that our dialogue with the Russian Federation is going along these lines. We have a keen interest to be reliable partners, but also predictable partners. But we also believe that instead of having a communist party in power, which existed in Moldova from 2001 to 2009, and while in power went from deep love with Russia to contradictory sentiments, and again vice versa, we believe that it's better to have a partner like us, who yes, speak the same language, be it in Brussels or in Moscow, about the key interest of Moldova to become eligible for the EU enlargement, but still being a predictable partner and being a reliable partner. Ukraine is our immediate neighbor on the east. Ukraine is important, I wanted to mention it to you, not just to Poland. Ukraine is very important to Moldova. I still don't know how long is your border with Ukraine, but our border has a length of 1,242 kilometers, which for such small country as Moldova, it means a lot, but it just shows the relevance and the significance of our relations with Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is a chairman also in office of the OSCE. I want to mention that Ukraine plays a constructive role in this capacity, a constructive role as a neighbor. Of course, we still have certain issues to address, be it the property issues, be it the border demarcation, but the overall dialogue, the overall trend in our relations is quite positive, and I'm confident that together we will be able to address the remaining issues and to focus on major objectives like energy, like conflict resolution, and like our pro-European integration, because if you move together along the same lines, it will be much easier.